Hello and welcome back to episode 5 of Dr. Petri's podcast Through the Holocaust. Today we are going to continue with Nazi atrocities. The first one we're going to talk about took place, it's actually called the massacre at Baba Yar, and this took place in Kiev, which is in the Ukraine. It's a city in the middle of the Ukraine, which is the country that is between Poland and Russia. It is east of Poland, on the way to Russia, and as Hitler is conquering these countries on his way to invade Russia. So in 1941, during the high holidays, which are what the Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, traditionally in September, the Nazis from Eisenstadt's Group C ordered the Jews out of this city in Kiev. And the Jews were essentially marched to a ravine, which is a big sort of gully, and they were machine gunned to death. And they used Nazi machine gunners, and they would stand their post, machine gunning people down, innocent men, women, and children. But they would be relieved after 1 hour shifts because, you know, the machine gun gets hot. It's hard to keep shooting at people for more than an hour. So every hour on the hour, the Nazis were relieved until they had murdered 33,000 Jews in 2 days. So the Einsatzgruppen were SS, which were called the secret police. And these police personnel were trained to commit mass murder. Their leaders reported to Reinhard Heydrich, who we talked about before. He was the Nazi chief of police and intelligence. That's Reinhard, R-E-I-N-A-R-D, Heydrich, H-E-Y-D-R-I-C-H. The Eisengruppen operated between 1941 and 1942 in the Baltics and the Soviet Union, where they murdered over 1 million Jews. So, and as we continue on into 1942, you're going to look at the countries that were occupied by Germany or German allies. And you see by 1942, the Germans had taken over France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Poland, parts of the Soviet Union, Norway, Italy, Czechoslovakia, Greece, the Balkans, and most of North Africa. So by 1942, Germany had conquered and occupied vast portions of both Western and Eastern Europe. And the Nazis planned to murder each and every Jew in these territories. They started building camps. They started putting ghettos together and organizing the way they were going to kill the 6 million Jews of Europe. This next picture shows Samuel Schrijver posing in the Jewish quarter in Amsterdam, which is in the Netherlands. And as the Nazis conquered and occupied neighboring countries, Jews were crowded into these ghettos or deported to concentration camps and death camps. Many people know the story of Anne Frank, whose family went into hiding in Amsterdam in an attempt to avoid capture. In the image of this sign, Samuel Schrijver poses by a sign at the entrance to the Jewish quarter in Amsterdam. Schrijver was active in the Dutch underground resistance. He made IDs cards for Jews from cards that he stole from Gentiles, Dutch Gentiles, non-Jews. So they could use those cards and say, nope, I'm not Jewish, and then they would be left alone by the Nazis. But ultimately, it's estimated that the Nazis murder 106,000 Jews in Amsterdam, in what's called the Dutch Netherlands. So moving on, we go to the Wannsee Conference, and there you see SS General Reinhard Heydrich at his desk. This conference was called in January of 1942. It was attended by high-ranking administrators, although Hitler did not attend. And this was the planning stages for the final solution to what they called the Jewish question or the Jewish problem. So this meeting involved a lot of discussion, of the Jewish problem and what to do with people who were mixed Jewish descent and in mixed marriages. It was suggested that they sterilize them and that they immediately dissolve any mixed marriages. So Reinhard Heydrich headed several important departments in Nazi Germany. He was part of the security police and the security service and the Reich Security Main Office. He also directed the work of the Einsatzgruppen, which we talked about. And, for this conference, he wanted to gather all the leaders of the relevant German government and Nazi Party agencies, and he wanted to coordinate the genocide process and assert the authority of the SS, the secret police, over all of these other agencies. Most historians believe that genocide had already been planned and its implementation had already begun before the conference took place. But regardless of the timeline, the notes, the minutes of what people said at the conferences clearly demonstrate the commitment of the Nazis to systematically annihilating the Jews. And in our next slide, we look at some of those notes, and you can see they say, under proper guidance, in the course of the final solution, the Jews are to be allocated for appropriate labor in the East, in the course of which action, doubtless a large portion will be eliminated by natural causes. This was how the Jews systematically worked, the Nazis systemically worked the Jews to death. They only fed them 200 calories a day. They lived in these crowded camps with poor living conditions, poor health care, and they would essentially work the men to death, and the same with the women. The possible final remnant will, since it will be undoubtedly consist of the most resistant portion, have to be treated accordingly. So we can be the cruelest to these people. It is because of the product of natural selection and would, if released, act as the seed of the new Jewish revival. So if these people are released, if these people are allowed to live, then they're going to create more Jews and create more problems down the line. Lastly, State Secretary Dr. Buehler stated that the general government would welcome it if the final solution of this problem could be begun in the general government. Dr. Buehler had only one request: to solve the Jewish question in this area as quickly as possible. So, the general government refers specifically to Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, which are concentration camps. Notice that at no point do the quotes specifically talk about murdering Jews. The Nazis almost always spoke in bureaucratic jargon and euphemisms, such as in the last line, when instead of saying to murder each and every Jew that could be caught, they say to solve the Jewish question in this area as quickly as possible. This is going to be important later when we talk about the war crimes, the war criminals trials, because it wound up being more difficult than people thought to convict the Nazis of war crimes. So in this next slide, we talk about Hitler's final solution, and we see bodies of Jewish victims. The Nazis called their plan to kill all the Jews the final solution. It was also codenamed Operation Reinhardt, after Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of police. Under the cover of war, they isolated, concentrated, and then deported Jews from all over Europe to 6 separate camps that were equipped with gas chambers. These camps were all located in German-occupied and in territories and in Poland. And while historians and researchers have discovered many memoranda and reports relating to the final solution, no specific order can be traced back to Hitler. However, plenty of secondhand testimony exists showing that Hitler had made it known to Heinrich Himmler and others that he wanted to implement the final solution. He wanted to execute all of the Jews. So Himmler's orders came about in July 19th, 1942, and Himmler said, "I order that the resettlement of the entire Jewish population of the general government, part of Nazi-occupied Poland, be carried out and completed by December 31st, 1942. And there's a picture of Himmler, who's in the left foreground. He's looking at a prisoner of war camp in Russia. And he said, by December 31st, 1942, no persons of Jewish extraction are to be found in the central government. A total cleanup is necessary. Himmler explains that this measure is necessary for the ethnic separation of races and people. And this measure also was intended to protect the security and purity of Germany and to prevent the development of a resistance movement. Now, there's a lot of movements, a lot of resistance movements that happened in these ghettos, and one of the best is a movie made in 2009 with Daniel Craig of James Bond fame, and it's called Defiance. I wholeheartedly recommend you look at it on Netflix. It's about four Jewish brothers that lead a resistance of about 1,000 Jewish fighters. It's a great movie. And when we talk about the deportation from the ghettos, it's important to remember that these major deportations came from ghettos all across Europe to killings, and they sent Jews to killing centers. It began in early 1942, when the camps first started using gas on the Jews. So the image in this slide shows Jews being deported from the Lodz ghetto, and many of these people would die at Chelmno. Later on, the Nazis would ship them further from the Lodz ghetto to Auschwitz. And this mass executions would continue. Now, history has saved some of these testimonies, these eyewitness testimonies of the deportations. This is one, a woman who's being transported or deported from the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. Warsaw is, of course, in Poland. Her name is Cecilia Klein-Polak. And she was born in 1925 in Czechoslovakia. They told us the day before that we can pack one small suitcase and we should be ready to leave the ghetto. When we came to the factory, there they started to search us again. The SS was there, and every woman had to, and every girl had to, undress naked, and we were searched internally for valuables. My mother was a very religious person, and all I could think of was how terrible this is for my mother to go through something such a terrible ordeal. And these deportations are frightening experiences for the victims. They're not sure what's going to happen. They're not sure if they're going to be separated from their family, if they're going to watch their family be killed. Many chose to believe that they were being resettled, perhaps in a work camp or a better area. And as the quote in this slide shows, these victims were subject to searches. The Nazis loaded deportees into crowded cattle cars of trains. People in the cars would have to travel standing up for days with no food, no water, no toilet facilities. And when they got to the concentration camp, they would basically just be stripped naked again, hosed down, and processed into the camp. So our next lecture will continue with testimonies of people arriving at Treblinka. I thank you for listening, and make sure you are taking decent notes, you are reviewing these notes, and you're trying to organize these notes before you take your next quiz. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.